Hey guys, welcome back. So now we are jumping into DC Future State and kicking it off with Superman of Metropolis. And with this first Future State video, I want to kind of set the stage and talk about what time frame we're dealing with and what year some of these events are taking place, because within this certain window or period of time within the near future, we're given different bits of information at different points and then later filled in as the narrative goes on. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping in and kind of just setting the groundwork for what Future State is, which are the events taking place from the year 2025, beginning roughly 4 years after the conclusion of death metal, but then from there literally spanning all the way to the end of time, which then heads into the Immortal Wonder Woman. But at this point, it very much follows what had happened after the conclusion of death metal, with Future State then beginning roughly 4 years after. And with doing so, it kind of lets us know ahead of time that the whole Hall of Justice and Doom thing just didn't work out. And I mean, hey, like, who knew? But perhaps sooner or later we'll see how exactly everything got to where it is now. Because if the Hall of Justice and Doom lasted about 4 or 5 years, like, I'd be shocked. But so now from here, jumping into Superman of Metropolis, which in this case takes us into the year 2030, where there's riots in the streets and this kid, he gets caught in the middle of all this chaos. And at the time that this is happening, a group of nanotech enhanced citizens, they're in a standoff with the military. And the reason that this whole thing had gotten heated or escalated up to this point, there's quite a bit to it, so bear with me. And so now the way that Metropolis had pretty much got turned into Cyberpunk Night City, it went a little something like this. Because it all started with a man by the name of Andre Trojan, who's the founder of Trojan Solutions, which is the company that provided all this tech for the people of Metropolis. But then after doing that, many of the people who became enhanced, they then became Andre's zealots, which then gave Andre power in numbers. And aside from that, he exiled Lex Luthor, crippled LexCorp, and him and his zealots declared Metropolis as the Free Republic of Metropolis. And that's when the military stepped in. But then it's also when Andre stepped out. And with leaving, he did leave something of significance that the military is also here to retrieve. But within this standoff, it gets hostile, like the zealots, they open fire, then the military opens fire. But then fortunately, your Superman of this current time, Jonathan Kent, he's able to swoop in and save the kid. But as far as what we know at this point, Jonathan Kent, he's been the main Superman of Metropolis for some amount of time now. But at this time, we're not given the specifics of when exactly Clark stepped down and his son stepped up, but it's mentioned a couple times that it's been about 10 years. But it's likely we'll see more of that as the story progresses and even more Future State unfolds. But one of the things we get to learn about Jonathan Kent and how he's doing in the year 2030 as Superman, which sounds like whatever happened right after death metal. But as far as what we get from people saying how John has been doing as Superman, for the most part, people are saying left and right that he's not doing that well. And we'll get into some more of those specifics in a little bit, but at the moment, that's more or less the response of the military because he's in the way of them retrieving the asset. But then on top of that, they also go as far to say that he let these people take the city from him, and that's just one of many events that will get referred to with Jonathan not handling things so well. But it isn't too long before we find out that Jonathan is here for the same asset that the military had came to Trojan Solutions to retrieve themselves, which as it turns out is this supercomputer that was made by Trojan Solutions by the name of Brain Cells. And so now here's the thing with Brain Cells, because Brain Cells was created by Trojan Solutions after Brainiac had attacked Earth sometime in the fairly near past, to where Brainiac was defeated by Jonathan and Supergirl. And throughout that fight, Jonathan had pretty much had Brainiac in a headlock, Kara burned Brainiac's skin off, and Andre Trojan used that skin to develop this artificial intelligence, which was clearly not a bright idea for him to do by any standards, because it also presents this underlining tone of Brain Cells having some level of control or influence over these zealots. But with Jonathan arriving here, he takes Brain Cells before the military can. But when this happens, it's kind of funny because Jonathan and Brain Cells communicate very casually. But even with doing this, Jonathan expresses that he's not trying to be Brain Cells' partner or necessarily help him out. But with doing this, all he tells Brain Cells is that he has a plan. But aside from that, he doesn't go into details as far as what his plans are, and he really just pulls Brain Cells along. But ultimately, the reason for Jonathan taking Brain Cells, it's mainly because he doesn't want the military to take him and turn him into some weapon of some sort. But then also while this is happening, Brain Cells tells Jonathan he's not the Superman that his father was. And on top of that, he tells him like he's human with just enough Kryptonian blood to make him interesting. And it's also here where Brain Cells kind of just runs through some of the events that have taken place from the last 10 years, starting with Brainiac's invasion, and then another event that had taken place with the 5 Empires, then the Golden Gods of Creon, and after that, the Time Luchadors. And really, like, from what it sounds like, for the past 10 years, at least Kara has been around for the most of it. But also prior to this point, for like the last year, Jonathan has been handling things in Metropolis on his own. But with pointing out all of this to Jonathan, Brain Cells tells Jonathan that he should leave things like this to the real Kryptonians, Clark and Kara. But with hearing this, Jonathan pays it no mind and he calls for Kellex to initiate Operation Hourglass, which essentially is repurposing Kandor technology with shrinking cities, and Jonathan uses it on Metropolis. And when he does it, he expresses like it's a way of helping or ultimately saving the city. But when he does this, Kara then shows up and she pretty much figures that Jonathan had just destroyed Metropolis. And you really can't blame her for coming to that conclusion because it very much looks that way. But for Jonathan, after shrinking the city, he then takes it back to the Fortress of Solitude along with Brain Cells, and Kara shows up. And when she gets there, she tells Jonathan like, well, initially she thought that Trojan had blown up the city, so then she started tearing up Trojan bases all over the world, but eventually when she ran into members of the US military, they filled her in and they told her that Jonathan did it. And as a result, that's what led her to come here. And Jonathan quickly lets her know, like, he didn't destroy the city, he just shrank it. Relax, like that's any better. But at this point, Kara's already informed the military, so they're on their way. But also her intention with coming here was to take Brain Cells from Jonathan and tell him to step down as Superman. But when this happens, Brain Cells begins to glow green, like through the course of the heat of their conversation. And when this happens, we're given the explanation that neurodium, which is one of the elements which is used to construct Brain Cells, that it allows him to influence Kara, with its effects being more potent on full-blooded Kryptonians. And when this happens, it's not even like a full mind control, it just pushes her anger to the point to where she knocks Jonathan out of the Fortress of Solitude and outside to where the rest of the military drones are at. And when this happens, like, a few things are going on here, because first you have Jonathan going back and forth with the military, with him telling them that they're trespassing in his airspace, and I'm not really sure how that works when it comes to the Fortress of Solitude, because that place is completely alien, so I don't know if it really has rights to any airspace. But while this is happening, Kara then comes out after Jonathan, and with her creating some distance from Brain Cells, she still has a bit of the influence which put her in attack mode, but after creating some distance with the source, she's then able to speak with more reason and also hear Jonathan out. And it's here where we get the explanation from Jonathan of why he did what he did. Because just before the standoff between the Zealots and the military, Jonathan had talked to a number of the people from Metropolis, and many of which who expressed their trust issues with Chosen Solutions, and even some of them had their trust issues with him and Kara. But ultimately, this decision that Jonathan had made to shrink Metropolis and take it away, it was really just a last minute idea, because shortly after, his hand was kind of forced to fight off the military and protect the people, and in that moment he couldn't decide what to do at the time, because if he were to push back the military completely, then Chosen Solutions would have free reign over the people, but then if he were to side with the military and let them take Brain Cells, then they would have just turned it into a weapon. So with shrinking down Metropolis, he essentially had did it to buy himself some time. And after doing so, he later tried to justify his action by telling himself that he was giving the people of Metropolis a new type of freedom. But Kara also lets him know like what he's doing, it isn't freedom for the people, but instead it's just like giving them a new type of prison. But while they're sorting this out, this huge ship, which belongs to Brain Cells, it seemingly pops up out of nowhere, because neither one of them heard it approaching, but then all of a sudden it just appears and is hovering directly over the Fortress of Solitude, which then causes Jonathan and Kara to immediately go back so they can secure the safety of Metropolis. But when they get back, Metropolis is gone, and it's here where they discover that Brain Cells had been planning for everything to come to this point the entire time. But because Brain Cells can't really control Jonathan, he had instead guided a number of events around him to lead him to this point. And in the case of Kara, he couldn't really control her either. But if she was already leaning in a certain direction, Brain Cells would just use the neurodium and push her further into that objective or direction she was already going. But it's not really clear if Brain Cells had used some of that on Jonathan, being that he's half Kryptonian, but from the information we're given, Brain Cells, he just describes how he had led Jonathan down this path to where everything he's done up to this point was like the only option he had. But at this point, Brain Cells has gotten what he's wanted, so he uses that same energy to just blast Kara, and after that he then tells Jonathan his reasoning for all of this, because the mission for Brain Cells is a mixture between Jonathan and Kara, Andre Trojan, and Brainiac wrapped up all into one. Because Brain Cells, he expresses that he wants to protect Metropolis, but with his reasoning for taking the steps that he has to do so, it very much comes from the essence of Brainiac, of which Brain Cells tells Jonathan the essence of Brainiac is very much a part of who Brain Cells is, and for obvious reasons, a part of Brainiac is Brain Cells himself, but now with a very twisted and augmented agenda of protecting Metropolis from Jonathan, who he sees as Metropolis's biggest threat. And when this happens, like for Jonathan, it's like the huge eye opener of like, dang, I've been messing up. So now Jonathan's really got to fix it on his own. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.